Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this important webinar on where we will share some lessons learned from markets, millers, and implementation to engage private sector successfully and more successfully in large-scale food fortification programs. This is a webinar that is co-hosted by the Micronutrient Forum and Millers for Nutrition. We all know that fortification is one of the greatest success stories in public health. It's one of the many solutions to improve dietary intakes, and it's highly recognized as a very cost-effective intervention with a strong return on investment, and yet it remains underutilized. And one of the reasons for this is that it is difficult to engage private sector successfully, and moreover that despite decades of fortification programs, very little is known about enablers and barriers that can unlock the potential of the private sector stakeholders and can increase the reach and the impact of large-scale food fortification programs. So in this webinar, we will hear from examples of the Millers for Nutrition experience of different approaches that have been successfully implemented in 3 countries, in Kenya, in Nigeria, and in India. And we will discuss whether these successful examples can be replicated in other settings as well. So we will hear from these program approaches in the webinar, and then we will gain insights from participants on large-scale food fortification implementation experiences that can be shared more broadly. Before we start, however, I would like to share a few housekeeping points. All the participants in this webinar, your microphones will remain muted during the webinar, but during the Q&A sessions, we will have 2 Q&A sessions. You will have the opportunity to unmute and to ask questions, and you're highly encouraged also to ask your questions in the chat. We have a very full program today, and we want to make sure that we have sufficient time for the Q&A sessions, but there may be more questions than that we can deal with in the Q&A. So that is why you are encouraged to ask the questions in the chat, and the speakers will, as much as possible, address your questions. This webinar will be recorded and will be shared online on the Micronutrient Forum's YouTube channel, and screenshots of this webinar may be used for social media purposes. Please ensure that you are logged in with your full name and your affiliation so that these are visible to others. And if you want to rename yourself, or if you want to add your affiliation, that can be done by right-clicking on the 3 dots that are in the top right corner of your Zoom window. And if you want to introduce yourself in the chat function, you're more than welcome. And as I said, you can also ask questions to the speakers during the webinar in the chat. So I would like to now start with the webinar program, and the first speaker is very well known, I think, to everyone working in large-scale food fortification, because he has years of experience in that field and is a real guru in large-scale food fortification, Larry Omuna. He's currently the Executive Director of Aggregate, and he will set the scene for engaging the private sector in large-scale food fortification. So Larry, over to you.
Thank you so much, Saskia. I hope you can all hear me very clearly. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are now. Thank you, Saskia, and thanks to the Micronutrient Forum for inviting me to participate in this very important information sharing event. I think it will be useful to start with some background information. There is no doubt that the success of salt iodization programs in many African countries in the early 90s certainly went a long way to catalyzing the drive for large-scale food fortification programs in many low-medium income countries, including African countries. The we also noticed during that period that there were lots of fortification programs, voluntary fortification programs by some multinational companies. Some were done for restoration purposes. For example, B vitamins were added to wheat flour. Some were done for enrichment purposes. Lots of complementary infant cereals fortified with micronutrients, cocoa beverages, even margarine with vitamins A and D. The early conversations, we had lots of early conversations around the mid-90s regarding which new vehicles could be used for large-scale food fortification. And during that period, there were lots of surveys, food consumption surveys, FRAT surveys, development of standards. Lots of trials were done. Trials were conducted to understand if there was going to be any change in organoleptic properties of the food vehicle. There were lots of conversations about the premises, about the formulation, about its stability. But some countries actually moved faster than others. For example, Zambia decided to fortify its sugar with vitamin A as early as 1998. Of course, learning from countries like Guatemala that had first fortified sugar in 1977. In the early 2000s, 2002 to be specific, Nigeria approved its mandatory large-scale food fortification regulations. South Africa did the same in 2003. And during that period, we saw some private sector companies, especially in South Africa, going beyond the standard and adding additional micronutrients to differentiate their products from their competitors and, of course, to gain competitive advantage. We did see in Nigeria a dairy producer launch a dairy product with a label fortified with 27 vitamins and minerals. Malt beverages were even fortified with vitamins and minerals with huge billboards. Of course, these were companies building on the large-scale food fortification momentum, the conversations that were going on. In Kenya, a couple of companies even introduced new brands of fortified maize meal long before the mandatory fortification laws came into place. So, but the game changer actually started happening when the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition then came on board, and and this was around 2003, 2004, and started supporting several countries mobilized under the banner of the National Fortification Alliance. It helped to develop and implement large-scale food fortification programs, funded those programs, maize meal in South Africa in 2003, maize meal and wheat flour in Zambia 2006. Eventually, only wheat flour was done in Zambia. China soy sauce with iron, just to mention but a few. And what we also had was executing agencies for the implementation of these programs were either UN agencies or they were international NGOs, and in some cases were actually national government-owned agencies. The focus of these executive agencies were primarily on advocacy, the development of standards, and at some attempts to convince the private sector to comply. In Francophone West Africa, we saw the industry associations being brought on board to help in endorsing the concept of large-scale food fortification. Social marketing campaigns were quite common then. Lots of t-shirts, lots of party, lots of banners. Lots of training were given to government partners, especially those who were involved in quality assurance, quality control, HPLCs. Almost every government department had new HPLCs given to them. Despite all of this, enforcement was almost non-existent. The private sector participation was at its best lukewarm. The industry had thousands of reasons to give for why they were not complying. It was either about cost, there were issues around lack of consumer awareness, they talked about no level playing field. Those who wanted to comply said they needed a level playing field before they could comply. As a matter of fact, in 2015, GAIN had a study published, and in that study, they had analyzed 20 national fortification programs in 12 countries, and they found that less than half of the samples were adequately fortified against relevant national standards, which confirmed the potential gap between fortification policy and what reaches the consumers. And so in 2016, when TechnoServe entered into the fortification space, we decided, and I was still at TechnoServe at that time, we decided to test another approach, put the private sector in the center of the conversation. Our hypothesis then was that if we put the private sector in the center of the conversation, if we provided them with the relevant technical assistance, if we addressed whatever technical challenges that they faced, if we made them take full ownership of the levels of micronutrients in their final product, that we would see increased compliance with large-scale food fortification regulations. And we were able to convince Gates Foundation Nigeria. We got a grant from them for a project that was called the Strengthening African Processors of Fortified Food, SAF project, in late 2016. And this project was implemented in Nigeria, Kenya, and Tanzania, and focused on wheat flour, maize meal, sugar, and edible oil. What exactly did we do? We engaged the processors of these food vehicles in these countries. We picked samples from the market, analyzed the samples, and approached the companies with an offer to help them rectify the problem that made them not able to comply. We sent technical experts to support them with their formulation, with their tech to solve their technical issues. We didn't rush to report them to the authorities. Instead, we trained some of them. Some of them were trained at the Beulah Milling School. Some were taught various QA technical support. But we worked towards earning their trust. It was about let's help you solve your problem. And we believe that it was an incentive to them to fortify their products. But we didn't just stop there. We elevated the conversation. We elevated our engagement beyond QA/QC teams in the factory. We wanted large-scale food fortification to be seen as an essential part of the company's operation, not just corporate social responsibility, not CSR. We chose to be slightly disruptive, of course, in a very positive way. And we devised a means of getting the CEOs and the leaders of industry interested in large-scale food fortification conversations. And how did we do that? In 2018, we established this CEO forum. And that at that first CEO forum, we were able to get this with the support of Gates Foundation and the Aliko Dangote Foundation. We were able to convince Mr. Dangote himself and Mr. Gates to play the role of conveners. TechnoServe was in the background. TechnoServe was doing the legwork, the heavy work. And we were able to get these two super VIPs to play the role of conveners. Of course, every CEO wanted to be in the same room as Bill and Aliko. They also wanted their companies to be counted as part of the group doing the right thing. In fact, on that day, they queued up to sign the commitment charter. And that was the beginning of an annual CEO forum that would involve CEOs, government ministers, regulatory agency leaders, and of course, sometime in 2020, 2019, 2020, we even had the Vice President of Nigeria join that very important meeting. What was the major topic at those meetings? Compliance. We talked about compliance. We provided updates on the program. And no CEO wanted to be embarrassed. And they would often go back to their factories and instruct their production and QA folks to comply. As a matter of fact, in 2020, we achieved very significant results. Compliance for wheat flour and sugar in Nigeria crossed the 90% mark. And remember, we were coming from very dismal levels of between 12 and 30% at the beginning of the SAF program in 2017. Edible oil sadly remained low at 34% due to the fragmented nature of that particular sector. But we didn't stop there. We also wanted to exploit the competitive spirit and the competitiveness of the food industry. And so we introduced another initiative called the Micronutrient Fortification Index. This innovation certainly challenged the industry. The industry folks always want to be number one. Nobody wants to be number two. It challenged them to prioritize large-scale food fortification. It definitely challenged them to entrench large-scale food fortification as part of their day-to-day operations and to position their brands. And you know, brands are extremely important to the private sector. It helped them position their brands as safe and nutritious vehicles for micronutrients, adequately fortified, and of course, they always want to be the best in the market.
One more minute, Larry. One more minute.
These innovations were also introduced in Kenya. By the time the millers of nutrition program was launched in 2023, the private sector companies had fully embraced large-scale food fortification and certainly all owned the program. But let me stop here. My colleagues will share more information on what happened after 2023. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Larry. Thank you so much for setting the scene and for providing this historical context, showing that the decades of engagement with the private sector in large-scale food fortification has really brought important lessons learned, the importance of engaging the CEOs, the importance of really putting private sector at the center, and the importance of recognizing this as a business value proposition and not just a matter of regulatory or policies. So thank you very much. I see a lot of hands up, so this was well appreciated, and also I think a very good introduction to the next section, where we will hear more about some of these approaches that have been implemented in different settings. And as I said, in this session, which will last for 36 minutes, we will describe 3 of these approaches implemented in Nigeria, India, and Kenya by Millers for Nutrition. And we will also hear from the millers and from a duka, which is a kiosk owner, what some of their experiences have been with these approaches as part of the program implementation. So with the first set, and I will have to be very strict on the time because I know that the session is very full, and we want to make sure that we can have a Q&A at the end. So the first approach that we will hear from is about the Micronutrient Fortification Index. Larry was already alluding to that in his presentation, and the Kenya Millers Fortification Index. This was implemented in Nigeria and in Kenya. And our next speakers that will speak about this are Ayodele Tella. She is the portfolio lead on large-scale food fortification and program manager in Nigeria of the Ignite program from TechnoServe. And Paloma Fernandez, who is the CEO of the Cereal Millers Association in Kenya. So Ayodele and Paloma, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Saskia, and greetings everyone. Salut, Abari, Mahaban, and Ni hao, konnichiwa, in case you're coming all over from Japan. Welcome. I will speak to what and how the Micronutrient Fortification Index motivated food processors in Nigeria to meet national standards consistently. For those unfamiliar, now the Micronutrient Fortification Index has helped us in Nigeria and in Kenya as well to move the industry behavior beyond just basic compliance, business as usual, towards a stronger commitment to quality fortification. And as Larry alluded earlier, it was conceptualized in a 2018 maiden edition of what we call the National Nutrition Leadership Forum, otherwise known as the CEO Forum. And it serves, the MFI for short, serves as a standardized ranking and, next slide, please. Yes, right there. Thank you so much. It serves as a standardized ranking and self-regulatory tool designed, right, to strengthen industry fortification quality assurance. And it uses healthy competition among businesses to actually encourage brands to improve both their performance and internal processes. So apart from, the euphoria of the moment during the awards, behind the scenes, they can continue to review and refine their internal systems. And I'll give you a literal example of this is the reactive engagement of the Millers for Nutrition team by non-awardees. So there's an annual award cycle that is tied to the end of every annual MFI series. And at the end of every ceremony, non-awardees that are companies that didn't take maybe the first top 5 awards actively engage the team to troubleshoot their system and prepare them for the next cycle so that they can take those awards home. And that is a very positive and desired behavior that the MFI has helped to initiate indeed. Now, next slide, please. The MFI methodology is built on 3 weighted pillars known as the self-assessment tool, which takes 60% of this tool, industry intelligence at 20%, and periodic product testing. So we go into the mills and the market and test the product, not once a year, but repetitively, because we use that data to engage the industry for continuous improvements. Note that these components feed into a reporting dashboard that you see to the right of your screen, and then it tracks overall fortification scores, on an annual basis. However, in recent reviews based on over 15,000 data sets that were collected in Nigeria as well as India, and also from industry feedback, of course, this methodology is under refinement to enhance its agility and the utility to the producers that are voluntarily participating on it. Next slide, please. And in a snapshot, because this is not a very technical meeting, but the framework, just for those that are not very familiar, the framework is set or was built, after several consultations with industry stakeholders. So it wasn't TechnoServe just dumping and yet another tool on the industry, but it was a very consultative, very iterative process with industry stakeholders, and it ensured that it was practical, it fit the purpose, it was relevant to them. And it allowed the millers to have the opportunity to consistently review and refine the key business sustainability areas, including their governance, their personnel, how they hire, how they retain, how they maintain quality staff, their production and continuous improvements, how they engage the public with their products through labels, through media engagement, and so on and so forth. And of course, their procurement system, because as you all know, it's baggage in, baggage out. So how are they making sure that they set up their systems to respond to quality? So those are some of the things that the industry has been able to benefit from participating voluntarily on the Micronutrient Fortification Index. Next slide, please. And as far as uptake in Nigeria, for instance, is concerned, in Nigeria, when we commenced the pilot in 2019 till the last cycle in 2025, participation has grown by over 400%. We started with just 4 pilot mills, and now we have about 18 mills accounting to over 30 brands of sugar, edible oil, and wheat flour. And it has supported producers through improved operational efficiencies. Next slide, please. Through operational efficiency enhancement, stronger risk management, and we are seeing how producers themselves are telling us that their systems are now reactive, that reactive system or, window dressing just to tick compliance checks has been replaced by structured protocols, digital ledgers, technical audits that have strengthened their relationship with regulators. And we are seeing an era where Nigeria, for instance, one of the key agencies such as NAFDAC, that is equally designing a risk register for companies that would not just go in as business as usual, but will base their interventions to the industry, their monitoring and enforcement exercise on the risk assessment of each business. So for instance, a company that is participating on the Micronutrient Fortification Index will be less risky to the regulatory agencies than another company. So those are some of the benefits that the industry has reported gaining from the MFI. Next slide, please. An example of such a progress, in this slide is seeing how one of the leading wheat flour companies in West Africa, for instance, one of the first participants on the index, has retained their compliance of the micronutrients in wheat flour over the years. And in the 4 cycles we've heard, some of their brands have come in the top 2 brands. That's because, like Larry said earlier, nobody wants to draw from the top. So this public recognition and award system is ensuring that companies that are already performing stay motivated, and those that are not up to par yet have the aspiration to also be named and famed. We also have non-financial returns. Next slide, please. Yes, so we also have non-financial, return on investments, including stronger brand distinctions, government recognition, for instance, and employee pride before and after the award. In some of these pictures, we have a representative of the Vice President's office right there handing over the awards to the winner in the last award ceremony. We've got ministers from different federal ministry agencies, really coming to endorse, to appreciate and recognize
can you wrap up?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
This is the last slide. So I want to say that there's been progress in compliance and there's behavior change. And I want to thank you for listening and hand over to Paloma, who will tell us how the Cereal Millers Association in Kenya adopted the Micronutrient Fortification Index and adapted it to fit the Kenya context, not just taking what was done in Nigeria, but CMA has been able to refine how the index is used in Kenya. So recording really admirable success in Kenya as well. So over to you now, Paloma, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Paloma. You have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ayo and Larry. You've actually just talked a lot about what we wanted to talk about. So I think for us at the CMA, what really motivated us to join the KMFI, which is the Kenya Millers Fortification Index, was that it was an actually industry-led initiative and government-supported. So unlike previous initiatives, it wasn't about coming to a mill to find fault. It was actually saying, open your doors, let us look at your systems, test your products, understand where the gaps are, and let us help you make it better. And I really think we shouldn't underestimate that. Companies are fiercely competitive, and yet they were willing to open their mills, processes, and their data to independent scrutiny. And that kind of transparency takes courage. So I think for us at the CMA, KMFI kind of gave us a way to turn that commitment into a practical way of demonstrating that we were doing the right thing. If I looked at what kind of information of data compelled us to get our members interested, so as Ayo had said earlier, KMFI was not a new concept for us. It had already been developed and used in Nigeria. But when we brought it to Kenya, we were very clear that we couldn't simply take a model from another market and apply it as it was. So CMA, TechnoServe, and the industry worked together to adapt it to the Kenyan context. We actually co-created some of the assessment parameters and added areas that for us were very important to Kenya, such as aflatoxin testing. We were very happy. We had 5 CMA members who agreed to be pilot companies. And this was incredibly important because it gave us real Kenyan data. And it allowed us to sort of refine systems before they were even in the market. And that's why we were able to position KMFI, honestly, as a practical support for businesses rather than a compliance exercise. How did we recruit members to join the KMFI? I think what we did working hand in hand with TechnoServe was to really build confidence in the program. The minute we had 5 pilot companies who wanted to join, every other miller was like, if another miller is opening their doors and going through this process, perhaps there's real value in it. So at one point, CMA was really saying, we were not saying join the KMFI, millers were looking and saying, what do we need to get there? Because the recognition really became aspirational. And what have been the observations from participating millers? I think one of the strongest feedback has been that millers value the practical support. There is something else that came out that was equally important, was pride. We've seen companies being genuinely proud of their KMFI standings. We've had millers put up billboards showing their performance. And imagine that something that could have been seen purely as a regulatory obligation has become something a company is prepared to advertise. So for us, KMFI was not just an index. It's not just about compliance. It is also about an industry taking ownership of the food that it produces. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paloma and Ayo. This was really interesting, and also to hear that it is possible to incentivize and increase these feelings of pride, and therefore have a more effective engagement. Thanks so much. We will now hear from the second example, and this is about voluntary rice fortification in India, and which poses, of course, challenges to engage private sector in a situation where there is a voluntary fortification policy. We will hear from Monojit Indra, who is the Senior Practice Lead from TechnoServe India and Program Leader Asia for Millers for Nutrition, and from Sri Vaishnavi O, who is the CEO of KCP Nutri Poshan in India, about how to make markets work for voluntary rice fortification. Over to you, Monojit.
Thank you, Saskia. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the session on India's rice fortification in the commercial Indian market. It's great to see people joining from so many different places and time zones. Thank you for being there. Next slide, please. So if I just do a recap of how rice fortification started in India, I think we have to first of all acknowledge the patronage that government of India provided to this. And right from 2013 to 2018, there were multiple pilots which happened across the country that culminated in a standards of fortified rice kernel and fortified rice, which was published by India's Food Safety Authority, FSSSI. And finally, in 2021, the Honorable Prime Minister announced a phased nationwide rollout of the rice fortification through the social safety net programs. There are multiple social safety net programs in India, but the predominant of them is public distribution system. In addition, there are midday meal school, which is called PM Poshan, and there is also an integrated child development system, which is called Anganwadi. So all of these programs, the government started in a phased manner, distributing fortified rice from 2021. And by 2024, in just about 3 years' time, 100% of this rice, which is close to 35 million metric ton and reaching about 800 million people, that got distributed in fortified form. So this is undoubtedly the world's largest fortified rice distribution program in a social safety net program. And that too, it got the kind of scale that it achieved within such a short period of time. Nowhere in the world it happened, because it was directly backed by the government and with a lot of other development sector organizations which also pulled in terms of supporting the government sector. Now, in terms of where are we today, out of India's total consumption of about 110 million metric ton, 100 to 110 million metric ton, about 35 to 40 million metric ton is in the social safety net, and about 65 to 70 million metric ton is in the retail commercial market, out of which about 13 to 15 million metric ton is in the packaged or branded form, which is predominantly in the urban and peri-urban areas. Millers for Nutrition, which it is focused on the fortification scale up in the retail commercial market, because the government had already taken care of the social safety net program. Next slide, please. Just one point here is that recently the government has temporarily stopped procurement of fresh fortified rice for the social safety net program distribution, because there have been certain concerns on shelf life of fortified rice kernel, because once the rice comes into the in India's supply chain of long supply chain of social safety net, it has to stay there for close to 1.5 to sometimes even 2 years. So there have been certain concerns that whether this such a long supply chain, whether the FRK will have the required shelf life. So there are certain studies which are going on. Till the time those study results come up, there has been a temporary stoppage. Now, with the enabling environment and the stage set up by the government in terms of the fortified rice, making it well known in the social safety net program, when the Millers for Nutrition program started, TechnoServe started engaging with the regional rice brands in the top 6 rice growing states of India. And the aim was to how we can motivate these some of these top regional rice millers in terms of launching the fortified rice, which was in the open market, retail commercial market, which was completely non-existent. Now, this motivation started first from explaining the blue ocean strategy, which fortified rice in all its form and manifestation currently still is a blue ocean. And then there is this product or brand differentiation, wherein how to differentiate it also from the fortified rice, which is there in the social safety net program, because in some way there is a perception in the consumer's mind who are buying from the retail commercial market that rice which gets distributed in the social safety net program is a kind of poor man's product. So it's not for me. So to get over that stigma, instead of just focusing on the micronutrients, which are the three
One more minute,
micronutrients
Monojit. One more minute.
which are used for distributing in the social safety net program, a whole other list of optional micronutrients were also looked in so that the product differentiation was fully in place. And the third element of the motivation was in terms of the social impact through business, wherein do good for the society. What is doing good for the society is also doing good for the business. In addition to end-to-end technical assistance, which is sourcing right quality fortified rice kernel, lab testing, and nutrition declaration on the pack, a whole host of commercial assistance was provided to the millers. And in terms of this, included high-profile brand launch events, go-to-market strategy, and also participating in some of the very high-profile events like Gulf Food, etc. Finally, there were B2B linkages, which were also facilitated through these global trade players. Last slide. So to sum it up, in the last 18 months, Millers for Nutrition has helped 15 brands launching about 37,000 metric ton on a cumulative basis fortified rice, virtually from a zero level. And this is reaching close to 700,000 consumers today, which is, we are just scratching the surface, as we know today, considering even the packaged packaged rice segment, close to 15 million metric ton. In that 37,000 metric ton is just a drop in the ocean. But the right beginning has started under the guidance of Millers for Nutrition. And I would now hand over the mic to Sri Vaishnavi, who is the CEO of KCP Nutrition and who is one of the important regional rice millers from southern parts of India, who has decided to take the plunge and launched a fortified rice in the commercial market. So let's hear from Vaishnavi in terms of what motivated her. What are the supports she got from Millers for Nutrition, and what are the challenges she's still facing? And she's looking to overcome those challenges in what way in making fortified rice a mainstream food category item. Over to you, Vaishnavi.
Thank you for that, Monojit. Hello, everybody. Hope you're all having a great time understanding all the amazing things that all the speakers are speaking about. So I'll quickly run you through the journey of how we have taken the leap from regular rice to fortified rice and how we are trying to get a share in the market for the same. So firstly, I would like to tell you that we are very much happy with how Millers for Nutrition have supported millers like us in understanding the technicalities, specifications, and the do's and don'ts of the entire process. And when we talk about voluntary fortification, we have come to that decision of voluntary fortification because we have understood the importance of adding the micronutrients to your everyday food. So we are trying to make this as effortless nutrition, and we want the entire India to have this their regular rice and get ample amount of micronutrients to their bodies in their regular food. We could able to come up with this brand of more than brand, I would say we have added a range of fortified rice to our existing brand, and we are calling it multivitamin rice, so that the adaptability and understanding gets easier for the regular people of India. We came into voluntary fortification because we wanted to give it back to the nation in terms of their health. And of course, there are challenges when it comes to accomplishing such a big task. One of those challenges would be awareness about the product, which is very common when such new products come into the industry and when people come across such new products. The similar thing happened with the low GI rice a few years ago, and the more people got to know about it, the more they are adapting. And this same pattern will replicate with fortified rice as well in the coming few years. And that is it from my side. We just want to make sure more and more players come into the game of fortification and more people come forward, so that more number of brands can offer better nutrition through everyday staples.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for Sri and Manojit for this interesting example that, you know, focusing on branding and on market approaches and on actual practical support can really make also voluntary markets work. So the next and the final approach that we want to highlight in this session is from Kenya, where we will hear about improving access to fortified staple foods at the base of the pyramid using a market-based approach. We have two speakers in this session. The first is Elizabeth Kushni, Senior Program Manager East Africa from TechnoServe, and the second is Damaris Wambua, who is a Duka owner, which is a market stall owner and a member of the National Duka Owners Umbrella Organization in Kenya. Elizabeth, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all the speakers who come before me. I think one of the key points that we realized, I think, and you've all heard from previous conversations, is that there's a lot of millers and there's a lot of companies that are doing the right thing, and it costs to do the right thing. So when we walked into these milling fraternities, the question was, so we are doing all this, you ask, we've joined the KMFI, we're doing a good job at the KMFI, but there's such an unlevel playing field. There's so much poor product, there's so much low quality product that is in the market, and it's literally edging us out. And TechnoServe really, our motto really is on business. And I think, as you've heard from Larry and just down through the speakers, is that there's a big focus in TechnoServe with working with the private sector. And so one of the things that we did look, Millers Foundation did look around, is to see how could we then support the millers in bridging where their products were at and kind of finding a bridge to market these good products. We're testing them, we're supporting them through technical assistance, we're doing all the works. But then there's a gap between that and getting the products to the market. And we were really lucky to have an entrepreneurship program in Kenya that was working with Dukas. And Dukas are like small mom and pop shops, really, or kiosks, as they like to be known by in East Africa, that serve the base of the pyramid market. And we quickly learned that there was this entrepreneurship program, the National Duka Organization run under something we're calling Smart Duka, had actually worked to formalize these Dukas across many, almost 10 years, and they had worked to formalize close to over 50,000 Dukas. So they had a network of close to 100,000, formalized almost 50,000 of those. It was the perfect opportunity for us to then bridge the gap. We also soon learned that not only is there like quite a gap, we began to learn that there was a lot of like, what do you call it? Like a lot of myths around accessing the base of the pyramid market. Those myths around it's very expensive to access this market. Those myths around that the product is too expensive. So we did an initial base of the pyramid survey, and it released, and we had a lot of new insights. There's a lot of premium products in this market, and there's also a gap between good products, good quality products, and that particular market. So one of the first things that we did was being able to have conversations and being able to begin a lot of change management, working with the millers, working with the business and private sector. We were really, really lucky to partner with the Cereal Millers Association and to begin to have a lot of their millers pilot their products in this market and to kind of reframe this base of the pyramid market as a viable market rather than a beneficiary group. That was a critical first step because in Kenya, 70% of our population really gets all their produce from this market, which was it was an estimated about $20 billion market opportunity. And so being able to present this case to the millers was the first to kind of critical step in regards to seeing it as such as a business opportunity. But this particular entrepreneurship program had also done a great job of aggregating these dukas into sales groups. So into groups that could then buy as a unit, because then that would then reduce the cost of transportation, or it would also enable them. These buying groups then had greater power to negotiate. They had greater powers to then be able to actually have conversations about the kind of quality they want. We also were able to have conversations with these dukas about nutrition. We had the Ministry of Health in Kenya really support us. They came to a lot of these engagements and were able to talk about, from a government perspective, about safe products and about the place of the government in ensuring that, and also the place of the private sector. So those conversations that were kind of facilitated by private sector, by the government as well, were really kind of critical in changing a lot of the mindset and having these duka owners begin to become change ambassadors themselves, begin to then stock the right products and then speak to consumers who are coming into the shops to talk about fortification, to talk about food safety, to talk about just the various aspects that go into making a good product. And then, of course, these direct linkages as well between the millers and these dukas, these micro retailers, we began to see disruptions within the market, a shortened supply chain, improved communication, and then the millers had direct contact with the consumers through the dukas as well. And then, of course, the greatest win for us was to begin to see fortified foods on the shelves of what was before a very underserved market by the formal retail systems, and also to begin to see these dukas, these shops begin to grow from greater incentives. They had more discounts, so because the chain had kind of like shortened, then they could receive distributor discounts. We began to see small dukas grow into larger retailers and larger distributors in themselves. We saw millers making changes in regards to their packaging, making changes in ensuring that the product was available as well and kind of affordable for that particular market. And then, of course, to kind of see an increased awareness and trust and kind of like a lot more consumer education was really great through those kind of joint promotion activities. So one of the things that has been like really amazing, and some of the things that we have learned, is there is a lot of myth around the base of the pyramid market. It is a market that can absorb premium products, especially when the case is made and it's made affordable and available to them. Availability is quite a big thing. So bridging that gap was critical. But we've also really learned that market-based nutrition interventions are really more sustainable when they're kind of creating value for everybody in the ecosystem. The dukas could see value in regards to shortening the distribution chain and having higher profits. The millers could see value from a widening market base. And then, of course, just the different business opportunities that then availed a safe and nutritious food to this base of the pyramid. So what I'm going to do now is that I'm going to hand it over to a duka owner, and not just a duka owner, but also a real champion for safe foods, a real champion for a lot of the work that has gone between the Cereal Millers Association, between Millers for Nutrition, and between the Smart Duka, to kind of hand that over to Damaris, who's played a really, really key role in championing that. And she can kind of walk us through, from a Duka perspective, what did this take? What are some of the challenges they're seeing? What are the opportunities for further growth? and just kind of what does this look like for a proper Duka owner? So over to you, Damaris.
Damaris, can you unmute yourself? And can you, oh, you are, yes, you are. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me. I am excited to share our work with CMA Cereal Millers Association in driving nutritious products to our communities. What is driving uptake of fortified food? What is working and what we still need to be done? What motivated Duka owners to stock fortified foods? First, health and nutrition benefits. Duka owners understood that fortified foods provide important vitamins and minerals and could help address nutrient deficiencies. Secondly, customer demand. Customers seek healthier foods options, especially when they understand the nutritional benefits of fortified food. Thirdly, training and support programs that educate Duka owners on the health and business benefit of fortified foods. A reliable supply, availability of fortified products from wholesalers and distributors encourages shop owners to stock them. What is working and what is still needed? What is working is aggregation and organization. When we come together as Duka owners, suppliers take us more seriously. We can negotiate better prices, aggregate demand, and build direct relationship with millers. Training is also making a difference. For example, Duka owners are improving how they stock flour and other products, sometimes through simple changes such as displaying the fortified products more to make them more visible to customers. Awareness of fortified foods has increased through nutritional education and community sensitization. More Duka owners are stocking fortified foods due to growing customer demand. Fortified products are becoming more available through improved distribution channels, but there are still important barriers. First, more training and support for Duka owners to strengthen product knowledge and merchandising. Secondly, consumer education to increase understanding of the benefits of fortified foods. Thirdly, flexible credit would help significantly. Cash flow is one of our biggest daily challenges. Even 7 to 14 days of supply credit can make a real difference in our ability to keep products in stock. Constant supply is critical. When fortified products are unavailable, we stock what is available. And finally, we need simple consumer education materials such as posters, stickers, flyers that help us explain what fortification means to when customers ask, do consumers need to understand fortified foods? Absolutely yes. Consumers' understanding of fortified foods is a key factor of increasing their uptake, and they are more likely to buy and consume them regularly. And finally, when Duka owners understand fortified foods, they become champions who educate customers, create demand, and encourage other retailers to stock fortified foods. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Damaris and Elizabeth. And this was very, very encouraging to hear. And I think there's important lessons to be learned here that can also be applied in other countries. So thank you very much for sharing your experiences with us here today. And I would like now to introduce the next speaker, who is Rizwan Yusufali, who is the Global Program Director of the Indites and Millers for Nutrition program at TechnoServe. And he will present what the results were of these approaches that you heard about from Nigeria, Kenya, and India, what the results were on issues such as compliance, the uptake of millers, and the reach of large-scale food fortification. Riz, over to you.
Thank you very much, Saskia, and greetings to everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'll just give a second for the slide to come up. All right, we can go on to the next slide. So all of you have heard about the three approaches that Millers for Nutrition has used. They are just examples, and I'll just step back a little and show you what they collectively add up to, because I'm sure you are eagerly waiting for the so what were the results. But before I start, the shift in summary that we are trying to make is quite simple. Fortification needs to be a business decision and not only a regulatory or a CSR obligation. Technical assistance alone, which we've found, rarely sustains improvement in margin. If the margins are very thin, good performance isn't visible, or competitors can avoid the cost of fortification, which is frequently the case. So Millers for Nutrition connects four things around the Miller. First, independent evidence to measure performance. Second, targeted support to address constraints. Third, recognition and commercial incentives to create value. And finally, market linkages to extend consumer reach. So at a portfolio level, we have now engaged with more than 900 millers across 24 markets. And these represent about over 29 million metric tons of annual production. Adequately fortified product output since over the last 3 years has increased by approximately 6.4 million metric tons from the baseline. And this reaches about 680 million people having access to at least one fortified food vehicle. But the important point is that the pathway to those results differ significantly by market. Next slide. So let me try and illustrate through the three examples that you have heard about. Firstly, in Nigeria, 4 years of the MFI program have shown how independent data and recognition can translate into management action. 3 large millers have moved to adequate fortification, or by adequate, we mean fortification according to the standards in the country, and consistently meeting that. That has shifted approximately 900,000 metric tons of wheat flour annually, or 22% of the attainable market. Attainable market being that amount of food that is industrially processed that lends itself to fortification. But 7 brands remain inadequately fortified right now, around half linked to primarily vitamin A. So the data shows us both where progress is happening and where recognition alone is insufficient. Kenya required a different lever. The KMFI has become increasingly institutionalized thanks to the efforts of multiple millers as well as the CMA. And in 2025, 26 companies and 113 brands participated, with 68% of those brands scoring at least 80% on the index. So we then connected these recognition to commercial opportunity. Through the Duka initiative, which you just heard about, processors were linked with 493 micro retailers, generating over 8 million Kenyan shillings in transactions. So what this demonstrates is we moved from simply recognizing performance to demonstrating how industry can realize the potential market value of that recognition and better performance. Thirdly, India provides a third model. In a voluntary market, one of the strongest tests is whether consumers and buyers actually purchase fortified foods. As you heard from Manojit, between January 25 and May 26, M4N supported processes generating approximately 113,000 metric tons of incremental commercial sales. We also saw close to 40 fortified rice and wheat flour brands in a voluntary setting being launched in the open market, while institutional channels reached around 500,000 children across 3,400 schools.
1 more minute, Chris.
So different markets, different levers, but the same principle: align nutrition outcomes with how businesses make decisions. Last slide. So, in summary, what we've learned is firstly, regulation is necessary, but it's not a delivery model on its own. Performance more likely is to be sustained when businesses can see value through reputation, differentiation, buyers, and stronger sales. Secondly, there is no universal package. Nigeria needed visibility and diagnosis. Kenya combined recognition with market access. India required de-risking the initial launch into the market. And third, scale remains a systems outcome. Quality inputs, reliable testing, and an enabling regulatory environment and strong local ownership still determine whether these gains endure. So the next phase is not simply about proving that fortification can work. It is about making quality easier for businesses to deliver more value to them, for them to be able to sustain it, and increasingly owned by markets and institutions in which they operate. That'll be all from me. And back over to you, Saskia.
Thank you so much, Riz, and it's really, really encouraging to see that it is possible to scale, and it's also possible to make tangible impact through these approaches, and the lessons learned to make it in the next phase to make it even more impactful are important as well. So thank you very much. I just want to emphasize again that I see that there's a lot of engagement in the chat, which is great, and a lot of very interesting questions. The speakers will try to address your questions as much as possible in the chat, and we will have a Q&A session at the very end of the webinar. So if you can keep your questions till then, and otherwise put them in the chat, we will try to address them as much as possible during the webinar. So I would like to now hand over for the second part of this webinar to the panel moderator, who is Dora Panagidas, who is a consultant with the Micronutrient Forum on large-scale food fortification. And we are very happy to have her with the Micronutrient Forum because Dora has a ton of experience in large-scale food fortification, working in different organizations, including the World Food Programme and GAIN. And TechnoServe. So we are happy to have her here and chair the next panel. And she will introduce the panelists and also the objectives of the panel. So Dora, over to you.
Thank you, Saskia. Thanks very much for that introduction. Yeah, so it's my pleasure to be here today and to introduce our panelists. I'd like to request if you could all turn on your cameras if possible, so everyone can see you. So the panel today is really, our panelists will be sharing insights into some of the various topics that you've heard about today, including the use of indices with food companies in terms of compliance with fortification, and also making markets work for businesses and people. So again, it's an absolute pleasure to have all of you here. Let me first start by introducing you. We have Mark Weiner, who is the Director of Programs and Research at the Access to Nutrition Initiative, ATNI. Neil, I don't see you. Hopefully you're there. I don't see your camera on. Neil, are you there? Or did you drop off?
I am here.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I don't see you. Okay. Neil Lazrak, who's a policy analyst with the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. We have Florencia Vasta, the program lead for large-scale food fortification at the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, or GAIN. And then Riz, welcome back to the panel. You all know and heard who Riz is, of course, the director of Ignite Millers for Nutrition at TechnoServe. So yeah, so my first question is, Mark, is for you. We heard about the use of fortification indices in Nigeria and in Kenya and how it's motivated companies to improve their performance with fortification. And it's really had not only by doing that, it's also rewarded companies, brands. We heard about how millers have really been motivated to even use that and advertise that they've came up on top. So for us, it's really exciting to see what that's done. And the work that ATNI is doing with indices We're really interested to hear, do you think that this is a sustainable approach using fortification indices? And based on your experiences, how can we keep this motivation with companies to continue to participate and even in looking at opportunities in other countries as well? Over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Dora, for the question, and thanks for allowing Atni to participate here. Very glad and happy to hear about the success of the MFIs by TechnoServe. And I think when that started, Atni was around since 2013, and we, as you said, have experience with indices focusing on consumer-facing companies that directly sell packaged or processed food to consumers, and over the years have developed indices to drive change in that part of the industry. And I think we're really happy to see TechnoServe taking on this role to very specifically focus on the core part of the fortification value chain, being the millers. And we felt that we have a role to play to complement that with looking at how are these manufacturers that make use of fortified products or also fortified themselves doing this on one side of the value chain. And also we felt that there was a need also to look at what are the producers of fortificants or the premix suppliers doing. Of course, there is the Gain premix facility, but we thought it's interesting to see also what these premix providers can do, are doing and could do more. And we were very happy to see that the approach of having an index with the published methodology and which is transparent about what we're asking companies also drove positive change. We saw, for instance, a large premix provider. We also have DSM later speaking, but we saw, for instance, Hexagon, one of the larger premix providers globally, being helped by improving their transparency by the fact that we were asking questions and that they knew this was going to be published in an index. So we know the MFIs in Nigeria and Kenya have worked very well to get more buy-in from millers locally, as Rizwan and Larry have explained. But we feel there's also really a need and an opportunity for indexes to evolve over time to also become more public in also showing consumers and policymakers, okay, what's going on within the industry, within the company. So we feel, yes, there is still a place for indexes, and there is different ways of stimulating companies to engage. So that's with rewards, as was described, but it's also by giving them the floor to and the opportunity to publish and to be leaders in their field. And that's what we see is still working quite well these days. With the large manufacturers, what we have done over the years is not just asking these companies if they use fortified ingredients like flours, but also if they fortify themselves, do they comply with local standards, and also be transparent about if they indeed use fortified ingredients, because we see in some markets that's still an issue, that even where fortification is mandatory, it's not always clear if producers of processed foods are actually making use of fortified ingredients. So yeah, we feel that there's a continued need for indexes to help with transparency and driving companies to continue fortifying, but also having the right type of checks and balances and regulations to enable effective fortification and reaching consumers.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks very much for your insights on that. I think it's a very interesting topic, and it certainly made a lot of changes for the positive, having these indices, and for sure there's additional work that needs to be done. So thanks very much for that. Neil, my next question is to you, and it's around the issue of incentives. Millers for Nutrition was really based on a couple of premises. One of them is incentivizing industry and celebrating them and supporting them in this journey to improved fortification. So it was interesting to see in a recent, I think it was maybe last year, a publication by OECD on regulatory governance, that one of the pillars that came out as being essential for sound regulatory governance of fortification was incentivizing industry. So could you explain a little bit about what that would take and what exactly does that mean and what can stakeholders do to push that forward, let's say? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Dora, and thank you to the Micronutrient Forum and Millers for Nutrition for the invitation. Yes, indeed, previous speakers have discussed how the private sector can build market-based incentives through indices that create competition, visibility, reputation, and all of these translate into profitability. And I would like to speak to the other half of the equation, which is what governments and the public sector can do. And the OECD's work on regulatory governance of fortification, one of the clearest findings from that work is that the best incentives the public sector can offer is not necessarily money, it's actually policy coherence and predictability. And I think we all agree on the problem. Fortification carries real recurring costs for producers, premix, dosing equipment, quality control, adjusted production processes. And these costs can affect producers' margins, especially in competitive markets where fortified and non-fortified foods sit side by side. So the business case that looks viable on paper can be eroded not by the fortification rule itself, but by the policy and regulatory environment around it. When the premix crosses a border that is governed by trade policy, when we have dosing equipment that is taxed under fiscal policy, when the mill is licensed under industrial regulation and the loan for equipment depends on financial regulation, all of these pieces of regulation can send conflicting signals, and that then causes fortification to be difficult to implement in practice. So when that happens, producers can do one of three things: either they cut corners on fortification, or they pass the cost to consumers, or they exit the market. And all of three of these outcomes would undermine the public health objective. So I want to mention three things that governments can do to address that situation. The first one is to look at the entire book and not just the food fortification rules. A systematic policy coherence review looks at health policy, trade policy, taxation, industrial policy, agricultural and social policy is the best way to find the barriers that are imposed on fortification. GAIN has done this kind of diagnostic in Tanzania. This review asks questions like, is anything in the licensing costs making complaints more expensive, more difficult than intended? And the answer is yes. So that's the best way to detect these policy incoherences. The second thing is that streamlining market entry and making requirements predictable is really essential for businesses. Registration licensing should be really risk-based and proportionate. Prior authorization should be reserved for genuinely high activities.
There's something wrong with the sound. Sorry, Neil. There's something.
Can you hear me?
There's technical issues.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's I don't have any noise around me, but I hope
You're breaking up, Neil. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Is it okay? Is it any better now?
Yeah, it's better. It's better. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Brilliant. So yes, indeed, I was just speaking to reducing barriers to entry on the market. Quite importantly, requirements need to be transparent, easy to understand, and easy to find, so that millers know what is required from whom and by when. And especially for small and medium-sized enterprises, opaque or fragmented procedures don't just cost time, they also create uncertainty, and eventually they discourage entry. So predictability is really what allows a business to invest in food fortification, and clear, streamlined procedures are really important. They do matter. So that's also something that is worth investing. And the third one that governments can do, the third thing, is aligning the fiscal and trade environment with the fortification mandate. If fortification is required, the inputs shouldn't be taxed as if we were discouraging it. So that applies to premix, that applies to fortification equipment, and that applies to all forms of duties like tariffs, import duties, or VAT. Also, another thing, incentives are not about lowering costs, they're also about securing revenue for businesses. So when governments integrate fortified foods into social safety nets and public procurements like school meals or subsidized food programs, they do create stable, predictable demand. And we have seen this work in a number of countries. I can only cite one example among many is Bangladesh, rice safety net programs, where fortified rice is channeled through existing distribution systems, and this has reached millions of people. So for millers, this kind of recurring public purchase commitments does what a one-off grant cannot do. It justifies the equipment, the investment in equipment and quality systems. So I just want to close by saying that policy coherence is really a very strong incentive that is essential to the business case for fortification and is complementary to market-led incentives such as the MFI that we have already discussed. The OECD is currently finalizing a publication called Good Practice Principles for the Effective Regulatory Governance of Large-Scale Food Fortification. This paper discusses in more detail how to build a safe and supportive policy environment for this industry. There is a draft version of this paper already online for public consultation, so please do not hesitate to have a look and engage with us to discuss this further. Thank you very much.
Neil, thank you so much. I'm sorry, there's so much to talk about. I'm very worried about the time. Yeah, thanks. Florencia, can I, the next question is for you. I think you might have one or two slides. But we heard about the issues around even if millers are fortifying, they may not be complying. And I think one of the barriers that we're finding is that it's related to premix quality. So one thing that I've learned is that there are common quality issues that millers may not always be able to detect. So could you share a little bit of your insights on that? Thank you. And please try to be as fast as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Dora, and thanks everyone for having me here. So it's a really great question, and I think it's helpful to take a step back and talk about why premix quality matters so much in the first place. So premix is really one of the critical pieces of any fortification program, especially when it comes to compliance. So like you said, a miller can be doing everything right. They can be dosing correctly, following the right procedures, maintaining their equipment. But if the premix itself is poor quality, then the final product may still not meet the required standards. And this is getting more attention recently. In fact, the Manifesto for Accelerated Action on Large-Scale Food Fortification calls for 100% of premixes used in mandatory food fortification programs to meet their quality standards. So where do the challenges with premix quality come in? So one issue is cost. Premix can account for between 70 and 90% of a mill's recurring fortification costs, as we heard before. And as you can imagine, when producers are operating on very tight margins, there's a lot of pressure to find the lowest cost premix available. At the same time, the premix market is changing quite significantly. We're seeing more and more premix production happening locally. In fact, from the GPF data alone, 72% of GPF approved premix production sites are now in low and middle income countries, up from 46% in 2015. And that's just showing, again, the data from GPF, so not really showing the entire picture. That shift can be really positive because it can make premix more accessible and reduce the reliance on imports. But at the same time, it also means that some of the new suppliers popping up may have limited experience, and in some countries, there's limited regulatory oversight generally. So there can also be problems, as we heard before, with the premix formulation itself. For example, micronutrients may not be present at the right concentrations or levels, or the premix may not contain all of the required micronutrients. And so this creates a real challenge for the millers because the quality of the premix isn't something that they can easily verify themselves, as you mentioned. So if you're a miller and you're receiving a batch of premix, you can't simply look at it and know whether it contains all the right amounts of vitamin A or iron, for instance. You have to have laboratory testing to verify and really know what's in it. And in many countries, mills don't have testing capacity in-house, and there may also not be commercial laboratories available. So in practice, mills are often having to rely simply on the supplier's certificate of analysis, or COA, to tell them what's actually in the premix. And then there's another challenge here as well. In many fortification programs, regulatory monitoring of the final product only looks at 1 or 2 micronutrients. So as I mentioned before, a premix could be missing a micronutrient or have the wrong levels, and that may not be picked up through this routine monitoring. Next slide. So what can we do about this? There's a lot that can be done and is being done actually to address these issues, but I'll speak to 3 important key pieces that we're actively working on in the sector. Overall, monitoring of premix should be part of fortification monitoring. So first, if countries don't already have this, they need clear premix standards that define what good quality premix looks like. So this gives regulators a basis for monitoring, and it gives the producers a clear standard to procure against. Second, we need stronger monitoring of the premix itself. This can look like risk-based sampling of premix at the import level or at the mill level, because we know a lot can happen between when premix arrives in the country and when it's actually used at the mill, as well as appropriate approval requirements for premix suppliers, like looking at food safety certifications, stability data, and incorporating new schemes like local certification bodies locally in country and approved premix supplier lists. And importantly, when premix is tested during monitoring, we need to think about the full formulation. So if we only test 1 or 2 micronutrients every time, we may miss the problems with others. And so there's a case for either testing all of the micronutrients in the full profile, or rotating which micronutrients are tested each time. And then third, in order to do all this, we need stronger lab capacity locally and regionally, so that countries have the ability to actually test the premix. And I know there's so much more I could say about this, but Dora, I'll stop there.
Florenzi, I know. Oh, I really hate cutting people off. This is and it's such an important topic. I really appreciate your inputs on this. I know that so many people are working on this issue, and thanks so much. Riz, boy, I think you're only going to have like a minute to answer here, but we really want your insights on this. You have a lot of experience in food fortification globally. And today we heard about a couple of approaches used under Millers for Nutrition. So I think the audience would be really interested to know whether these approaches could be replicated, and what are a few components for a success, basically, because I'm sure that we saw that the MFI was replicated in Kenya, but what about beyond these 3 countries that we heard about today? Over to you.
Thanks, Dora. So food fortification in a minute. Wow. So the short answer is many of these approaches are replicable, but I would like to make a very important caveat here, that instead of cutting and pasting, many of these solutions have proven to be working, but instead of cutting and pasting, they really have to be adapted to the country context. And I'll share a few things that Millers for Nutrition and quite a lot of my work over the years has identified in how do you adapt it. So I think first principle is we need to understand the market and not just apply a predetermined solution. It's important to understand who produces the food, how are they distributed, how are they sort of structured in the market. The second principle is we repeatedly say that yes, the technical assistance and all that is important. The public health outcome is important. But we really have to make a business case for Millers, because these decisions are made on a commercial case. And we must combine the capability with the motivation. And then usually the motivation is a commercial motivation. The other one is there needs to be a credible measurement and feedback system to the industry. Many of the solutions we heard today, whether it's through KMFI, is through the Access to Nutrition Index, what the work OECD is doing, is really around building that credible mechanism. And we have to work through the whole ecosystem. So success doesn't determined by one solution or these silos of solutions, but how they're put together. And right from the beginning, it's good to design local ownership from the beginning. And that really helps towards adaptability of these solutions. Creating a level playing field is culmination of all of this. It frequently comes up. So in summary, it's not sort of the individual activities, whether it's training, testing, recognition, buyer engagement. These actions are not the model. The real model for large-scale food fortification is how are these combined for fit for purpose in a country context. That is the fortification model. And And if we apply those basic things on what is needed and apply it to a country context, then many of these solutions are quite replicable across countries. But it's not about cutting and pasting. We've learned that what you learn in Nigeria, if you just apply that in Kenya setting or in an India setting, it won't work. The thing is, how do you pick and choose what would be relevant for a country and apply it?
Riz, thank you so much for your insights on that. Yeah, and many thanks to the panelists again for sharing your thoughts, with us today. We really appreciate it. I'm sorry that it was so short because, like I said, these are really important topics that we could spend, at least a day on each of them, if not longer. So thanks again. And with that, I'd like to turn it over back to Saskia. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Dora. And I'm also sorry that we are running out of time, but I have a solution for you at the end of the webinar. So please stay tuned. But the last speaker, the final speaker of today's webinar is Monique Smorenberg, who is Senior Manager, Global Business Development, Nutrition Improvement at DSM-Firmenich. And we thought it was important to end the webinar with a perspective from an important private sector partner about some key components for successful engagements with the private sector. Monique, I hope you can shorten your presentation in 4 minutes, but the floor is yours. Thank you.
I'll do my best. Thank you, Saskia. And thanks everyone for the very rich and inspiring discussions today. So as I listened to the experiences from the various countries, the narrative really came back that food fortification works when cross-sector partnerships work. So for many years, fortification was often viewed primarily as a regulatory exercise. Government set standards, industry is expected to comply. But regulation really does remain essential. But what we really discussed today demonstrated that sustainable impact comes when public health objectives and business realities are aligned. So from a private sector perspective, successful engagement rests on a few principles, really. So firstly is a strong business case. Millers and food manufacturers are powerful partners in improving nutrition, but they also operate in competitive markets. So the examples shared today showed that when companies can see both the social impact and the commercial value of fortification, adoption and sustainability would increase significantly. Secondly is trust and transparency and the fact that data does matter. So the fortification indices discussed today are perfect examples here that measuring and recognizing performance, stakeholders can create an environment where companies are motivated to improve rather than simply being monitored for compliance. And then finally, cross-sector partnerships must be practical. So companies need access to quality premix, to technical support, to QA systems, testing capacities, etc. And what we've seen through the Millers for Nutrition is that when stakeholders work together to solve these real implementation challenges, fortification outcomes do improve. So the question really was posed, are the large-scale food fortification stakeholders on the right path? And I believe the answer is yes. So there has been a shift from isolated efforts to true collaboration, and we are seeing stronger public-private partnerships, better use of data, and attention to market-based approaches. And the recognition that we're seeing is that in the industry is not simply part of the implementation process, and industry is really a critical partner in achieving impact at scale. So is the work finished? Certainly not. If hidden hunger still affects billions of people, then we have significant work to do. But the optimistic side is that we're no longer asking whether food fortification works. The evidence is clear. The challenge really is now how we scale what works and how do we strengthen and sustain what works. So the recent BMZ call to action on catalyzing large-scale food fortification to end child malnutrition by 2030 is so timely and important. It's providing a shared roadmap for governments, for industry, for civil society around a few critical areas, specifically reaching vulnerable populations, strengthening regulatory systems, mobilizing private sector, as well as building sustainable and enabling environments for implementation. So to end off, really, the encouraging news is that today's examples have shown that we already have successful models. We have demonstrated approaches. We have committed partners, and we have growing momentum. And as DSM Firmness, we're really proud to stand alongside governments, millers, developmental partners in this effort, because making food fortification work is not the responsibility of one stakeholder. It's a shared responsibility and a shared opportunity to improve millions of lives. So back to you, Saskia.
Yes, thank you so much, Monique. And actually, you did a great job also in summarizing the key messages from this webinar. And I think, unfortunately, there's no time anymore for Q&As. But I do want to end with some key messages. And that is that, first of all, there were a couple of questions in the chat around the safety of food fortification, which was not really the topic of today's webinar, but I want to emphasize again that large-scale food fortification is a safe intervention. It has been implemented in many developed country settings for more than 100 years now, and the levels that can be found in these foods are highly controlled and have never really been created any safety issues or concerns. I also want to emphasize that you're more than welcome to approach us. We will put the email addresses in the chat with any remaining questions that you may have. And there is an opportunity to learn more about large-scale food fortification, the lessons learned from the private sector, the lessons learned from the public sector, and also the challenges and the barriers that are in front of us, and how the community can work together to overcome these. That will happen at the Micronutrient Forum Global Conference, which will take place next month in Accra in Ghana from September 28th till October the 1st. There will be a large-scale food fortification site event organized the day prior. There will be a side event on business and nutrition where these lessons learned that we've shown to you today will also be presented in far more detail. You're more than welcome to join us in Accra in person if you can, but the conference will also be fully hybrid, so if you want to join online, that's also possible through the link on the website. And I want to end here by saying that we've seen very encouraging examples today on successful private sector engagement. It's clear that these examples have important lessons that can be translated to other settings, but it is important, as Riz explained, to take the local context into account. And one other aspect that I found very, very striking across these three examples that we've seen is the importance of the people behind this, and the importance of how encouraging people such as the kiosk owners or the millers, incentivizing them, providing them with the knowledge that is necessary, with the access to, for instance, finances, or to this knowledge or to data, can really help to motivate people across this chain to help improve the impact and the reach and the scale of large-scale food fortification programs. So these lessons that we shared with you here today, I thought were very encouraging. And I do want to thank all the speakers. I do want to thank Dora, who pulled this all together, together with Rizwan. And I would like to wish you a very nice afternoon or evening or morning, wherever you are. And I hope you will connect with us for more lessons learned and for information. And this webinar will be put on the Micronutrient Forum YouTube channel if you want to watch it again. Thank you very much, and see you again. Bye-bye.